with the University of Minnesota's Sea Grant program. Tonight, you're here for our Springing into Action, Building Resilient Communities with Green Infrastructure webinar. This is the second webinar of our webinar series, Blooming with Benefits, Native and Deep-Rooted Perennial Plants. And again, we're so thrilled that you're here, taking time out of your busy days, joining us this evening to learn about green infrastructure and native plants. Tonight's webinar is sponsored by Minnesota Sea Grant and the Natural Resources Research Institute and funded by the National Sea Grant Program and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, so NOAA. We are glad you've chosen to join us here tonight. We're using a Zoom platform, as you may have noticed, and I'm going to do a tiny bit of Zoom housekeeping before we get going on our webinar. Tonight's webinar, you are muted with your video and microphones off. So feel free to eat your dinner, join us on the couch. We won't be hearing your dogs barking or anything in your background, but just know that you can interact with us throughout the duration of our time tonight. We encourage questions in our Q&A feature, questions for the panelists, for myself. If you have technical questions, my co-lead on this project, Tiffany Sprague, is going to be moderating the chat. So if you have some questions there, you can feel free to chat with Tiff in the chat panel. We also invite you to add the questions at any time during the presentation. So if you have a question that you think about while I'm talking or while our first speaker is talking, feel free to add it in the question and answers period and we'll address it at the end. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the second of 3 webinars in our Springing into Action series. The next webinar will be on Tuesday, and we'll focus on green infrastructure in our community. We invite you to join that webinar as well, or view the recordings of our first and third webinar. So our first webinar was last week, and we covered kind of green infrastructure practices around the home. Today, we're really doing that dive into native plants, and next week, thinking about our communities. These webinars broadly are designed to help you feel more comfortable in considering green infrastructure in your property, share how green infrastructure is used in our public and private spaces across northeastern Minnesota, and connect you to regional resources and agencies and organizations that support stormwater management, native plants, and green infrastructure. And overall, this series is a part of a broader Minnesota Sea Grant and Natural Resources Research Institute project that supports the adoption and use of green infrastructure in our communities. We're working with communities from Midway Township to Duluth and all the way up the shore in Lake and Cook counties to Grand Marais, looking at our local codes and ordinances for opportunities to use green infrastructure as part of our coastal community resilience. And I know I've said this term a lot, so if you're wondering what green infrastructure is, hang in there, and we'll get you in a moment. And tonight's speakers, so will be facilitating and presenting a little bit, again, Madison Rodman from Minnesota Sea Grant, but I'm thrilled to be joined by 2 additional speakers, Erin Loeffler and Cathy Wood, who'll be sharing about native plants a little bit later in the presentation. So again, tonight's agenda, we're going to go over the benefits broadly of native plants. Then we'll pass the microphone on to Erin, who will give us a Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources presentation and some resources they have. And then lastly, Cathy will finish up with a presentation from the Wild Ones Arrowhead chapter, and we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end. Hopefully leaving the night having you think about spring and think about being in your gardens and native plants a little bit more. And before we begin really talking about native plants, I want to start with some common language for us all and some of the words we're going to be using today. So stormwater or runoff is the collection or flow of water following a precipitation event, be that rain, snowfall, or snowmelt. Water flows off our driveways, parking lots, roofs, our lawns, ball fields, and even from forested environments is considered stormwater or runoff. It makes its way into nearby lakes and streams through storm drains, culverts in our urban areas, and in more rural environments through ditches off your property and into a nearby stream or lake. It's important to note that stormwater is not treated like tap water, so anything on the ground is fair game for stormwater to pick up and take along with it into the nearby body of water. So locally here, that often is Lake Superior. And this includes trash, pollutants, chemicals, fertilizers, excess soil, pet waste, and road salt. So when we talk about ideas like stormwater management, what we're focused on is how to slow the flow of water coming off our landscape and how to make sure excess sediment and pollutants do not make their way into our receiving bodies of water. In addition to the general complexities of how we manage water in our environments, we know that our climate is changing. Climate variables such as rain and snow patterns, our growing seasons and seasonal temperatures are in flux. And with these changes, we're seeing further complexities on how we manage runoff and how effective these practices are at curbing our pollution and slowing the flow of water. And lastly, one of our favorite stormwater management tools is green infrastructure, which attempts to mimic the natural water cycle by increasing the time water is held on site, so it's retention time, and slowing the flow and volume of water, allowing for more uptake by plants and trees, and increasing how much water can seep into the ground. Green infrastructure also helps trap nutrients and pollutants, the things that can cause closures of public beaches or can make streams unable to be swim. You can't swim in them. So think about like algae blooms and E. coli bacteria. Our first webinar went over some of the green infrastructure practices on the home level, and our third will cover what these look like that you might see in your community when you're driving around or walking around your local town. And so this diagram that you see on your screen shows some of these practices that you may or may not be familiar with. Things like rain barrels, rain gardens, tree trenches, permeable pavers, bioswales, green roofs, and even preserving our forested landscape and urban trees. So if you look closely, you can see some of these green infrastructure features on the screen in front of you. But the focus of tonight's presentation is fully on the plants. So the green in green infrastructure. And before again, our guest speakers, I'm going to give us a little tour and overview of the background and benefits of these plants in stormwater uses, and beyond. Before we go too far into the plant world, let's start with some basics. So native plants are plants that have evolved naturally in a specific region and are adapted to the local climate and soil conditions. Native plants can be grasses, shrubs, forbs, trees, vines, and ferns. And so here are some pictures of Minnesota native plants that you might be familiar with. Butterfly weed, milkweed, wild geranium, sweetgrass, blazing star, little blue stem, goldenrod, dogwood, elderberry, red oak. And a reminder that species native to one part of Minnesota, like here in northeastern Minnesota, may be non-native to another, or vice versa. Plants native to southeastern Minnesota may not be native up here. And non-native plants are species that have not existed historically in this area, but have been introduced due to human desire or human activities. Non-native plants can be many things. Zinnias, marigolds, our vegetable gardens, geraniums, Kentucky bluegrass, and on and on and on. And some of our less pleasant invasive plants like buckthorn and garlic mustard. And non-native plants do not always pose a threat to our native plants and can have many positive properties. They provide us food, beauty, a place to play catch or soccer or that wild game of badminton that we like to play. But they may not support ecosystem health as well as native plants. So for today's presentation, we're really focusing in on the native plants, and specifically those that are deep-rooted perennials, plants that live for more than 2 years or longer and have root systems that extend deep into the soil. And let's take a look at those roots. They truly are incredible. Native plants can have extensive root systems, and I'd like you to compare these two grasses. First, we have big blue stem, which roots can reach up to 10 feet deep. Just think of that, 10 feet. So oftentimes that's much deeper than the height of the plant that you see on the ground. And then conversely, you can see here in orange is Kentucky bluegrass. It has shallow roots of just a few inches. And so these deep roots on our native plants that you see in the diagram, kind of all of the plants except for that Kentucky bluegrass have these deep roots, and they're what make the biggest impact for stormwater uses. So let's go over some of these things. How do the deep roots help green infrastructure? First, the roots help reduce runoff and instead help water percolate and infiltrate deep into the ground at the site that water either rains or is directed towards. They help the water that falls on roofs, driveways, and our roads sink in and absorb into the ground on our properties instead of running off into those storm drains and into our lakes, rivers, and streams. And here's a diagram of a rain garden that shows these roots helping to infiltrate the water on this property. And a little shameless plug, um, our first webinar talked about rain gardens. So if you're really interested in learning more about rain gardens, we encourage you to watch the recording of that first webinar when it's available in a few days. And next, these plants can help with erosion control. The roots of native plants can help anchor the soil in place, which is especially important for sloped areas or shorelines. Native grasses are a good choice for erosion control since their extensive fibrous root system can be very effective at holding the soil in place. And wetland plant species are good choices for rain gardens and maintain the banks of ponds, streams, or lakes. And here you can see two photos of shorelines. One with a kind of typical mowed grass lawn. The grass is mowed very short, and erosion at the lake shore. And the other has a diverse native planting, which helps anchor that soil and stabilize that shoreline. And I just want to take a moment to mention that not all plants are best for all sites. So if you are curious about what plants are best for, say, a moist site or sites with high salinity or salt, or even shady sites, I'm going to encourage you to check out this Blue Thumb Plant Finder tool. Which I believe our next presenter will mention as well. But really, just like not all plants are native in all different places, not all plants are best suited for particular environments. So you want to plant the best plant for your site. So if you have the opportunity to live along a lake or a stream, you might have some additional considerations for which plants you might want to plant. And then also plants are able to trap sediment and prevent that sediment from reaching lakes and streams. And this is important as sediment can be an impairment and make it hard for fish to find food, breathe, and spawn. And additionally, these deep-rooted perennial plants can help better filter out pollutants and nutrients than shallow-rooted ones. So this can help clean stormwater when it's used in plantings like bioswales. So the photo at the left shows you some examples of maybe how this lot was designed to have plants that were kind of intercepting the maybe runoff from this green lawn area. And the picture at the right is a parking lot that you might recognize. There's a beautiful recently installed green infrastructure planting bioswale in the Barker's Island parking lot in Superior. And so this bioswale is helping to filter all the stormwater that's coming from the parking lot before it enters Lake Superior. And lastly, plants have many, many, many benefits beyond stormwater. And this alone could take the remainder of the hour we have together, or a whole college course, or a whole degree program. So I'm just going to give you a few highlights of the benefits of native plants beyond stormwater. The first is biodiversity. Native plants support our local wildlife and pollinators, our bees, butterflies, and birds, providing food and shelter year-round. Next, they also are important for climate resilience. Native plants can withstand harsher conditions, such as drought, increased moisture, and pests better than non-native plants. Additionally, they provide carbon storage and sequestration. They can capture and store the carbon from the air into their roots, into those that deep root biomass underground. Additionally, they help soil, improve the soil structure and fertility. They don't need as many chemical inputs, which supports a diverse amount of soil organisms and microorganisms. And really optimizes kind of soil health in that location. And they can be low maintenance and have less maintenance and cost savings than typical traditional lawns and landscapes. So once native plants are established, they typically require less maintenance, less water, and fertilizer. And a big benefit, no mowing. And finally, native and landscapes are sustainable and beautiful, and plants promote mental and physical well-being, which is a quality that you can't oversell. So taken in in mass, we have all of these benefits that native plants provide in addition to the stormwater benefits that I discussed earlier. So now hopefully you're inspired by native plants and all they can do, and maybe pondering using them in your homes or landscapes. And so it's time to transition this webinar to two individuals that represent organizations that can provide the how-to resources, the funding, the camaraderie, the access to plants that you may need or want on your native plant learning journey. So first up is Erin who's an ecological science conservationist with the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll let Erin take it away.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. That was really great. Let me try and get this screen loaded. I need to share. Are you
Looks great.
seeing it? Okay, good. Let me 1 second here. Sorry. It's not my first Zoom, but sometimes it feels like it is. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I really appreciate getting the opportunity to talk about some of the programs that are benefiting our pollinators and also establishing and native plants throughout Minnesota. So again, Erin Loeffler, I work for the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. Our mission with Bowser is to improve and protect Minnesota's water and soil resources by working in partnership with local organizations and private landowners. You do notice in our mission statement that it does not specifically mention protect native plant populations or insects, but we do know that through the water, and we'll talk more about that, how establishing these plantings can improve both the soil and water resources on your property. So we can't talk about plants without talking about pollinators, right? So just as a reminder, maybe this new information for folks that right around 80% of all flowering plants on Earth need help with pollination. And so there's many insects that pollinate. We'll go to the next one, but some of the crops that we need that benefit from pollination are the blueberries noted here and strawberries. And it has been known to say that 1 in 3 bites of food that you eat have been contributed through the act of pollination. Another big crop would be almonds, which I think right now they're being pollinated, but that is pollination through our non-native honeybees. So who's doing the pollination? As I mentioned, we have bees that are pollinated, flies can pollinate, butterflies and moths pollinate, wasps, beetles, birds, and bats. We don't have a bat that pollinates in Minnesota, but we do have the hummingbird that will frequent some of these plants. So it's a big, diverse group of insects that are helping these plants reproduce. So I think sometimes we forget about that because we think a lot about the really cool insect, which is the bumblebees or the bees themselves. And there are a lot of different kinds of bees. I think we think a lot about just the bumblebees themselves, but if you can look on this, it's maybe hard to see. They are just a very small portion of our pollinating bee insects. So it's good to think about, if we can help with this one species, how it could potentially help all the rest of these species, because they need help. You can do a quick Google search and just find all of the challenges that these insects are facing with, the declines of nearly 40% of declining pollinators. You can also see too of this Fargo. If you see the publication there, they call it the monarch massacre. So that was an issue with some application of aerial spraying for mosquitoes, and monarchs were literally falling from the sky right in Fargo. So there's just a lot of research and publications just acknowledging the fact that we have some really big issues with our decline in pollinating populations as well as bird populations. And why is that? Some of the factors that contribute to insect loss, they're pretty complicated, but as mentioned, the pollinator or pesticide and pollution issues, loss of biodiversity and floral resources, pathogens, climate change and extreme weather, and habitat loss is the one we're going to focus on today. So why do we have habitat loss? Because we have decided to just convert everything to a monoculture, whether it's converting from to agriculture or impervious surface. You can see, and maybe you can't see, but if you zoom in really close at Minnesota picture, all those little red little dots are remnant prairies. We've lost, I think it's like 98% of all remnant prairies in Minnesota due to these conversions into these monocultures or these non-native land uses. And the number one most irrigated crop is our turf grass. So thank you for covering the benefits of why we would want to think about not having use monocultures of those Kentucky bluegrasses and incorporate the diverse mix of deep-rooted species. So this is kind of a fun fact, maybe this is new to some of you, but in 2017, it's not, I guess, so much fun, but in 2017, the rusty patch bumblebee was listed as an endangered species. And we do have a population of the rusty patch in Minnesota, as you can see by the map. The dark green is their primary location. They're really located pretty heavily in the metro area. We're not exactly sure why we have such a population of them there, but we have seen some documentation of them in Carleton County too. So I think it just happens to be the population, people are in the metro taking pictures, but that's just my theory. Anyway. So what did Minnesota want to, so what did we do? We wanted Minnesotans care. They really do care about insects and plant species. And so we were really excited to be awarded Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund grant for 2 years to pilot the Lawns to Legumes program, of which maybe some of you have been participated in that program. So the Lawns to Legume program was established to protect pollinator populations and other wildlife by building a movement through community conservation and equitable engagement. And how we're doing that here in Minnesota is really I kind of call it like a three-legged stool. So it's through building a movement, through public engagement and outreach, much like I'm doing here today. Then there's also an individual support grant who are partners through Blue Thumb and Metro Bloom administered that $400 grant, which is been really, really successful. People have really enjoyed that financial support. And then the grant that I manage, it's a competitive grant that we put out through a request for proposal, and that's called the Pollinator Pathways Grant. This is a map. Participants of the Lawns to Legumes program, the individual support grants can, once they get their planting established, they put a little bee in here, and it's really good to show just the level of support that people in Minnesota, residents, are doing to help not only help this endangered species, but also establish biodiversity on all the landscapes in Minnesota. This is another example of the Pollinator Pathways grant, where the community approach to conservation. So these are all NGOs, cities, SWCDs that got funding through a competitive process and is really like targeting these areas to do pollinator conservation and increase biodiversity in their communities. So just briefly, the highlights of the Lawns to Legumes program, we received over 41,000 applications from residents throughout Minnesota. So that's huge. There really isn't any program like this in the nation that's really had the participants just so excited and interested in doing this type of conservation. So it's been really exciting. The one thing I do want to note on here is not only are we building habitat, we are also sequestering carbon, as you had noted in the prior presentation. They're measuring it about 183 metric tons of carbon per year, as well as storage. So we did mention that retention of those rain gardens and those big root systems our native plants are actually collecting and storing water. Some resources available to everybody in the world who would like to take a look at them are on our website. We have tons of information on there. I'm going to go through some of it, but I just really encourage you to go to our website and just poke around, because you'll go down rabbit holes for hours looking for information. But I would suggest starting here And this is our pollinator and biodiversity toolbox. So you can start clicking on these different icons and it'll provide you in-depth information about many things. One of which is more of, how to do these pollinator gardens, or we could call them green infrastructure practices, really. And so there's a few different types of pollinator garden or type that you can do on your landscape. And we're going to go in a little bit of detail, but the native pocket plantings, those are just smaller ones, to the beneficial trees, which we mentioned previously. The turf conversions or pollinator lawns, to the bigger sized meadows, to container plantings, which is a new practice that we're trying to do more in just because obviously some places don't have the capacity to be able to convert turf. And so this has really been a fun practice to work with. So as you're starting to think about why or where or how to do this, there's many different resources to consider, different design considerations. The one that I think is most important is really taking a look at your property on a Google map or a plat book or something like that, and really draw out where your water is. So where water is moving on your landscape is really important, and it's depicted in this diagram here of your garage. Where's the water coming from your garage versus from, your sidewalks? Also considerations would be, where are existing trees? Where's the shade versus the sunny spots of your yard? Taking into those considerations, you could potentially come up with areas that you would like to that would be not eligible, but maybe in your mind the best place to be putting these type of residential or these pollinator gardens. Another design consideration is to think about pollinator foraging range, because they can vary. So we've got the big monarch that can fly real far, as we know, migratory. It can migrate from Mexico, so that's exciting. To our little tiny pollinating friends that are really small and they'll only pretty much forage, feet. We're talking 65 feet for the sweat bee. Rusty patch bumblebee can go a little bit farther than that, but that's why it's really important to think about, the connectivity of space within your residential landscapes for those pollinating insects. Another thing to think about is your resources available through the year. So sometimes it's hard to think about like spring, as these queens are coming out, they're looking for sources of nectar and pollen. And once I just went on a walk here. I'm located in Duluth, and I saw the pussy willows were already, some of them were already blooming. So that's really excited. Those are the first available resources, but just as you're planning these, thinking about what's blooming throughout the course of the year, as well as the habitat provided for nesting in the winter. And I just have to, native plants, we talked a little bit about native plants prior, but I think also being cognizant about native plant that are cultivars. So they can trick you really easy, but you can see based on those seed tags or those plant tags there, when they kind of have a fancier name. Cinderella butterfly flower, it's a cultivar of the butterfly milkweed. So you really want to look at the naming convention of the native plants that you're selecting. So that's kind of that's one that takes a little bit of getting used to when you're looking at selecting plants. And as I had mentioned, the design consideration for those stem nesting bees. So we don't want to be out there right now as much as we want to. Probably start cutting things down. Let's give it some time to get those queens moving out of there. So now that you kind of considered all of those when you're thinking about installing these, you don't have to think much too hard either, because on our website and other at Metro Blooms too, we've got all these templates that walk you through different design considerations, because not everybody is a landscape architect. So sometimes you need a little bit of help. So I'd encourage you to look at these resources. They've got all sorts of different plant selections, and on the back they'll have different ones. If you go to a native plant nursery and they don't have a certain thing, there's different ones that you can switch out of there. And so there's a ton. We just developed 2 more that are on our website. So I'd encourage you to reach out to that. And you could bring this into your native plant nursery and just be like, this is a template I'd like to do. Can you help me with them? And they are a great resource. Another resource, is this plant finder that was mentioned. It's very underutilized, but this is for folks that maybe have a little bit more expertise and are really thinking about designing these in a way that's aesthetic to them. So color, height, geographical region. So it's really, really handy to just go in here, put the light exposure that you need, soil moisture, and it comes up with these beautiful different plants that they recommend you to plant. And then for each plant, it'll go into greater detail about that plant. And so it's really valuable, especially if you're wanting to get a deep dive into that in those specific plants. It gives you more resources. So the other thing to think about too is not, we talk a lot about plants, but there's also seed mixes. So my colleague and I work, he is the one that does a Dan shop, but he develops seed mixes for bigger, larger areas for planting, because seeding versus planting, plant is definitely a different ball game. So you really want to think about your space. If you're going to be doing seeds, do you want it a wild looking, not maintained, more of just that really kind of wild space, or are you much more of a specific about where you're placing these plants, and you want your neighbors not to yell at you all the time? I think is another consideration when you're trying to figure out what type of planting to do. Most people do just go ahead with their first one. Don't start too big. Start with a small one. This is just a 10 by 10 garden. You can see that these are plugs. So by removing the turf, you can plant those plants individually in there. Another practice to consider is a boulevard planting. So this one actually gets me really thinking about the green infrastructure, because oftentimes these boulevards actually collect sediment, and you can see by the top they're domed. So as we're spraying and snow is melting, it's running off and refreezing. This could be a hazard to people, pedestrians who are walking on your sidewalk. They can slip. So boulevard plantings are really great to really capturing that water within those boulevard, small kind of unused areas that you don't like to mow. Those can be really helpful. You mentioned rain gardens. It sounds like you went to a deep dive with that, so I won't go into too much detail about the rain gardens. Beneficial trees, again, I honestly think that they're, especially for the northeast part of the state, this is the bread and butter pollinators up here. For me personally, just thinking about those early spring bloomers and the shrub species up in northeastern Minnesota are really, really valuable to our pollinating insects as well. And as mentioned, another green infrastructure type of scenario would be these green roofs. We're just dabbling into that. I am never have done them before, but I'm super excited to learn, because I think that's also going to be a really helpful as we start battling climate change and increased rain events, and to capture water. And as mentioned, the turf alternatives. This is also something that's newer. These are typically, a lot of the seed vendors out there do have specific seed mixes for turf alternatives. I personally have never converted to one of these low growing type of no-mow lawn systems, but they're definitely taking off. There's some research being done by the university to see what's working out there. So that's going to be, I think, something of the future, especially for folks that do want it manicured, do want to have those deep root systems, and also to attract pollinators. And then the meadows, again, are bigger areas. This is still not very big, but if you're in an urban setting, they're bigger, they cost more money. This is when you really want to think about your seed versus planting, and what your neighbors might think, depending on your design of what you're going to be doing. And then helpful resources. There's so much out there. I think there's just a lot. It's half the battle is just navigating and finding the resources. And one of which is the Bible of all Bible, I think, for the pollinator planting, pollinators of native plants. This is a book. I've only been doing this work here for a year and a half, and this has been a very, very reliable tool to just really start understanding the benefits of pollination and the native plants, and how they're working together, and how we really want to plant some diversity so that we can support those insect populations again, or continue to support them. And then this is a shameless plug. We are still accepting applications for the Launch Legumes program until May 15th. If you've applied 10 times, which I've heard a lot of people have applied several times and not been awarded, I can, just try again. I think we already have a lot of 5,000 or so applications as of today. We have funding towards 3,000, but it is something where we really just even showing the numbers of applications that it's showing the need and the want of our residents in Minnesota that they really do care and really want to promote pollinator conservation, green infrastructure, and keeping the waters in their neighborhood clean and good for their kids and their pets and all the things. So how you can take action, spread the word. That's part of what we're doing today is if you tell your neighbor a little bit about this or you send people resources of the things you learn, that can really make a huge difference is that peer-to-peer learning. So I appreciate the time I was allowed today. I probably went over. If so, I really apologize. It was a lot of content. But yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know.
Thanks so much. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Erin Loeffler, who gave us this wonderful presentation and tons of resources. You're right on time, Erin. You're good. There was a lot of love for the adorable Rusty Patch Bumblebee in the chat, so encourage you to read those comments. We are getting some questions in, but right now we're going to transition to Cathy Wood's presentation, and Cathy is the president of our local Arrowhead Wild Ones chapter. So Cathy, you can share your screen and take it away. And reminder, keep putting questions in the chat. We'll moderate them for you at the speakers at the end. And Cathy, just let me know if you get those slides up. Okay, it's coming in. Looks great on my end, so you're all set. Oh, but you're muted, so you'll want to unmute and then you'll be ready to present. Cathy, we can't quite hear you, so there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all set.
Yay! All right. Well, I'd like to thank Sea Grant and Madison for inviting me to participate in this program tonight. You've all covered so much that I'm just going to talk mostly about wild ones, both on the national level and of course our Arrowhead chapter here. Okay, on the national level, Wild Ones is a nonprofit, and we offer education, resources, partnerships, and also we do a lot of advocacy with issues that are important to us and our environment. There are, as you can see, a lot of chapters across the country, and we have over 1,200 members in 36 states. I'm moving through this kind of fast, so we have time for questions. I want to give you a little bit of history, though. This is a picture of Lori Otto, and she's the one that really started Wild Ones. In 1977, 9 people got together in a northern suburb of Milwaukee at the Audubon Center there. And Lori was really fighting in her local community about weed laws. And also she was very concerned about DDT. And so she was instrumental with her neighbors and friends in getting together to talk about landscaping with native plants. And that's how Wild Ones began in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And the mission of Wild Ones is to promote native landscapes through education and action. I always say we educate and promote about the use of native plants and natural landscaping, connecting people with native plants. And on the national level, they provide webinars, free online webinars, several times a year. And then they also have an archive of those recordings. So that's open to the public. And as a member, you would have access to their journal, which comes out several times a year. It's an online journal. And they also have archives of the journal that you can go back and read about specific issues or features. And these articles are provided sometimes by experts in the field or by chapters members all over the country. Another thing that's provided on the national level that you have access to are native garden designs that are professionally done. They're free designs that from different regions of the country, and they're always updating with new designs that you can use as a template for your yard. Now, talking about our Arrowhead chapter of Wild Ones, we formed in, that was even before my time, in 2000 here, and we covered the Arrowhead region of Minnesota and the northwest portion of Wisconsin. We actually have some members as far away as Ely and Renshaw and into Superior. We gather at Hartley Nature Center from September through April to have monthly meetings. Either they would be online or in-person programs with speakers. Sometimes we have hands-on workshops, something like that. And those are all free and open to the public. And that's usually the last Wednesday of every month from September through April. In the summer, we do yard tours that are open to the public. Those are always fun. And some of our other activities as a chapter, we might have offer field trips, seed collection. We do have a seed exchange every fall that's at Hartley that's open to the public, and we have a lot of response to that. These are all native seeds that our members have collected. Sometimes we have workshops. The last 2 years, we've done native seed planting, winter sowing in the winter, which has been quite popular. And we partner with Duluth Monarch Buddies for the Monarch Festival in June and for some of their native pollinator plantings during the summer. And the important part is that you're gathering with people, like-minded individuals who have questions. They want to know how something grows, how do you work with this, but also to appreciate what you've accomplished as you're trying to create pollinator habitat. We also have demonstration gardens. This is at Hartley Nature Center. Our new one is on the left that we just planted last fall, and we're going to be continuing to work on that one this coming summer. And then also in Hartley's parking lot, the buffer there, we're creating a native garden there, which we can always use help with anytime you want to find out how to grow things and maybe to help with some of the plantings. We have a native plant sale the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend at Leif Erikson. It's the Rose Garden parking lot at Leif Erikson Park on May 24th from 8 o'clock in the morning, and usually by 9, it's all sold out. And our members dig from their own yards their native plants. So you know that they grow here, And that's what we bring to sell. So you're welcome to come and join us at 8 o'clock on that morning. There are a lot of native plant vendors here in the city or in the area that we would recommend, that we've dealt with a lot, rather than to going to the big box stores where you don't really know if they have neonics in the plants, if they're actually native. These vendors here all know exactly what they're talking about, and they're growing native plants from seeds that they've collected here. So to join Wild Ones, you could go online to wildones.org. You can come and visit, come to some of our meetings and activities. We have a website, and it's free. You can just see how it is, meet some people. We'd love to have you come and see what we do. And this is something that really strikes me. That was in Northern Gardener, just the recent issue, that if every household planted just one pollinator plant, this is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, they estimate that we could provide more than 120 million additional plants to support pollinators. So just even planting one pollinator plant, or as Erin was talking, one container garden would make a big difference. Here's our website, arrowhead.wildones.org. We also have a Gmail if you have some questions, you want to know what's happening. But on our website, it lists our activities so you can join us sometime. We also have other resources on our website. And here are different ways that you can connect with wildones.org. And thank you very much. I made it quick, Madison, so we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Cathy. It was an excellent overview of Wild Ones, and I'm already getting excited for the plant sale. And I didn't know you did a seed exchange in the fall, so I'm looking forward to that as well. We're getting lots of questions rolling in, and I want folks to know between Erin and Cathy's presentations, many resources were shared. Don't worry, don't fret if you didn't catch them all. We will be sending an email to everyone that registered with all of the resources compiled for you. So a great thing to pin and reflect back on as you get ready for springtime. And there'll be a recording of this as well. So we're going to jump in. Cathy and Erin, I invite you both to turn your cameras back on, and we've got questions coming in. Tiffany, my co-lead on this project, is also a native plant expert, so I've invited Tiff to join us for the Q&A. And let's just start with the first question that came in. And this is referencing my presentation, and it said your slide showed the roots of prairie plants. So think about that diagram. That great root diagram was of prairie plants, but are those good for our part of Minnesota? And whoever wants to answer that can jump right in.
Well, I can definitely say all of those plants that were listed there are fine for this area. It just depends on what your location is. If you're talking about sun, if you're talking about shade, you're talking about dry, if you're talking about wet, some of those are specific to certain areas. So you have to do your research on that.
Great. Erin, Tiff, anything you want to add to that one?
I would just say the cynic side also says, you know, typically our prairie plants are our southern species plants of the state, and to be climate ready, you'll already have them here when that climate moves here.
Right.
And
you know, thinking about it, I have a prairie boulevard. I know Tiffany does too.
Yep.
And so when you're talking about plants that grow in the dry and the sun, that's perfect. And during the drought years, recent drought years, I never watered the boulevard, and they were always gorgeous.
Yeah, great perspective. And even our local variations. So if you have a shady yard, maybe it wouldn't be the best place to plant these prairie plants. And if you live in a different part of the region, or you live closer to the lake or farther away from the lake, even between Tiff's neighborhood and my neighborhood, we have different things that grow well. So just think about your local site conditions. So let's move on to the next question. And Madeline asks, are there any native herbs to Minnesota? I'm pretty sure there's a mint and a chamomile, but is there anything else?
Oh. I'm just thinking of mountain mint, and there are a couple of different kinds of mountain mint. I don't know, would you consider yarrow an herb? Yarrow grows here.
I guess I could maybe just, I can't think of any. It's a great question. But we do think about, I think that would be a great question for someone that goes out and forages to know, because certainly, eating edible native plants there's different medicinal uses. Our Anishinaabe speaking folks will use these plants in different forms. So, my favorite edible native plant is a ramp or a leek in the woods. So that's one that I've done, but I would definitely do a lot of research before you start ingesting any kind of plant. But I don't know. I'm also not like a forager. I'm not good at it anyway.
And actually, just a little plug, our April Wild Ones meeting, an Arrowhead chapter, we are going to have an expert come and talk about native edibles at our April meeting. So look for that on our website.
Yeah, what a perfect segue. Sounds like a great presentation. So the next question's from Andrea. And they ask, any questions on what plants or grasses to plant in a steeply sloped boulevard in Duluth and gets plenty of sun?
I mean, my slope that's in front of my house is not super steep, but I mean, I have big blue stem and little blue stem, and all of it does fine. And it's been taken over by asters, a variety of different sunflowers, etc. I've never dealt with it. I think your biggest consideration is plant establishment during that kind of steep side, and maybe Erin and Cathy can speak a little more towards that, but just considering, potential washouts if it's on a really steep slope. So how do you just kind of reinforce those plants? My steep slopes, I don't put mulch down versus in some of my other gardens I do. So then you might be doing a little more plant maintenance because they might dry out a little more quickly as they establish, but you don't want to overwater and create a mudslide condition. Again, I'm unclear what we're talking about in terms of steep. So that might be some considerations, is just that initial establishment. But once they're established, I've never had issues with honestly anything.
I also recommend sometimes when people have steep slopes, besides the grasses, to get to put in some of the shorter shrubs. Just kind of, I don't want to call it a wall, but you're trying to stop the water flow. And so if you can build up a little bit with a variety of shorter, not huge, shrubs, like the honeysuckle or something like that, just to kind of beef up those areas, and then put the grasses in between. And then of course your deep-rooted flowers. Yeah.
Thanks, Tiff and Cathy. Jean's also putting some comments for fireweed, Joe Pyeweed, or sumac in a boulevard. I'll jump in and just note that it's always important to think about your boulevard and traffic patterns. So you don't want to plant anything too high that might impede. Say you have a driveway next to your boulevard, you want your pedestrians to be able to see traffic, traffic to see them, and cars moving in and out. And thinking about the plant finder tool that Erin referenced, some of our areas in Duluth have pretty high salting. So if you're on a busy street that gets a lot of salt from our local plow trucks, you might want to consider thinking about plants that have a higher salt tolerance. So that Blue Thumb tool does have a way to select salt. And the next question is answering Jean's comment. We don't all live in town. Agreed. Some of us live in more rural parts of the state. And so this next question really asks about thinking about our folks that live in a more rural location. So are these practices applicable to the dirt road parts of our counties? So say you don't live in Duluth or Two Harbors or Grand Marais, and you might be in a more rural location. Talk about native plants or practices in those areas.
Well, I know some people talk about ditches. You can plant in ditches, maybe not right close to the road because they might mow along that, which isn't great, but on the other opposite the road, you could plant in the ditches. And if you're talking about ditches that maybe have standing water sometimes, that would be a place where you could put some of your rain garden type plants in there. And then if you're in rural areas, do you have a lot of trees? There are a lot of woodland plants, shade-loving plants that can grow there. I'm not quite sure what they're asking about.
Yeah, I guess I would just add too, if you're a landowner and you have space and you'd like to convert, it from one thing to a native population of herbaceous or woody plants. I mean, there's so many different options out there. Your local soil and water conservation district would be a good resource because when you're talking about these larger land conversions, it's going to be, fairly expensive. When I talked a little bit about seed selection, are you going to do a seeding versus plug planting? So they would be a really helpful resource. Cook, Lake, South St. Louis Soil and Water, Carleton County Soil and Water are really have excellent staff with lots of technical ability to help kind of determine what to do with your land if you're looking to transition to something that's more native, for sure.
Right. And
Yeah, and in our go ahead, Cathy. Go ahead.
And then the other thing would be if you're talking about a wooded area, maybe tall trees, you might want to consider understory shrubs that bloom and maybe offer berries. Those would be really great additions for wildlife.
Yeah, we'll include SWCD Soil and Water Conservation District contacts for North Lake, Cook, North and South St. Louis, Cook, Lake, and Carleton in our follow-up email, so that way you can reach out to those folks directly. I think the only other consideration from a dirt road perspective would just be that location of the planting in relation to the road, as those roads might have some excess sediment runoff. Again, once plants are established, these native plants do quite well, but during establishment, it might be a consideration. But again, potentially you also have a little bit more land than individuals in town. So you probably have other areas that would make an ideal planting compared to maybe directly next to that dirt road.
Great. So we're winding down on time, and we've got one last question for you all. And this one's about, are there any veggies or fruiting plants that either of you would not recommend planting because they're non-native and harmful?
Well, you don't want to plant buckthorn, that's for sure.
I'm a vegetable gardener, so I don't know. There's no bad vegetables in my mind. It's just just making sure that if you're getting vegetables that are non-native, is that you're getting them from a place that's neonicotinoid free. And so that's going to be your biggest thing, to Cathy's point. Like the pollinators, especially when we're talking about bees, they don't really care. They're generalists, and those tomatoes need those bumblebees for buzz pollination. And so if you are growing vegetables, understand what that plant needs for pollination, I think is really important, and really make sure that your plant source is from a neonicotinoid free. And that's a question you should ask where you're buying your plants from. And if they can't, answer that, then you may want to think about a different place to purchase those plants.
The other thing I will throw off of Cathy's comment about the buckthorn, I know she said jokingly, but making sure you can identify buckthorn, because I do actually have a number of folks in my neighborhood who keep it because it does make some of those berries. And I think people think it might be then a beneficial plant to the community without maybe understanding what it is. So just looking into buckthorn identification and, becoming familiar with what that looks like and spotting it in your community.
Right.
Great suggestions, everyone. So my clock says we're at time, and I'm not seeing any more questions come in, but I want to encourage you all to consider joining us next week, where we'll be talking about green infrastructure that you might see in your communities. So we'll be joined by Kari Hadeen from Lake County Soil and Water Conservation District and Ryan Granlund from the city of Duluth. We'll talk about kind of the community scale green infrastructure. Additionally, Tiff has just put a link in the chat. We'd love to hear your feedback on this webinar. So grab that last link for our evaluation. We're also going to be sending it by email as well, so you can have another chance to share your feedback with us. I want to take a moment to express my gratitude for Erin and Cathy for taking their time in their evening for joining us, Tiff for sharing her expertise as well. And I hope we've left you dreaming of spring. I'm excited that Erin mentioned that the pussy willows are already out. So it's springtime, folks, here in the Northland. So wait a little bit before you get out in your gardens. Let those pollinators wake up. But hopefully we've left you with some resources, some ideas, so you can join us in tending for some native plants or starting a new native container garden on your balcony or deck. And take care, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Madison. Greatly appreciate you coordinating all of us.
You're welcome.